Good morning. I'm Scott McNurlin. I am the sheriff of Goodhue County for a day and a half. Here, I retire tomorrow afternoon at 4:30. Our chief deputy, Chris Johnson, a very good friend of mine, we started at the sheriff's office 35 years ago. Our intention was to retire at the end of this year together, but my wife and I found a house in Wisconsin that we purchased, and state law requires that if I move out of state that I can no longer hold my office. So that's the reason for me retiring slightly earlier than January. But Chris is a very qualified, competent individual to finish out the rest of my term. I think he's actually kind of excited about it. We've been kind of making a tour together. I tried to drag him over here today with me so you could meet him, but he's got other things that we're dealing with this morning. So it's kind of a bittersweet time for me. I've absolutely loved my job over the past 35 years. Although I knew the end was coming, at the end of the year, but to preempt it a little bit here because of this house purchase makes it even a little bit more difficult because I anticipated staying through the election and helping whoever gets elected transition in. And I probably still will do that in November, but I'll come back for that and do that. But it's kind of surreal now. My office looks like a bomb went off in it as I'm trying to move out, and kind of sitting there yesterday and looking at the mess and all the stuff and all the memories from all the years has been kind of a difficult process, because after you do something for as long as I have and you actually have enjoyed what you do, it's hard to walk away. For me, it was never like work. It was more of a calling for me than anything, and I'm going to miss it. And some of the stuff that we do, I might not miss so much, dealing with some of the difficult situations, but I certainly will miss the people. We've been blessed to have wonderful people like Tom that work for us. It's made my job so much easier, and I've really felt very connected to the people that we have brought into the fold of the sheriff's office, and I'm going to miss, quite honestly, many of them because I've worked with them for so many years. But Rosie had asked me actually last fall if I would do this presentation. Little did I know and little did she know that tomorrow was going to be my last day. At the time I said yes. So here we are, and what we're going to talk about today is something you see a lot on the news lately, especially. We've had some very major incidences in the past decade. In the studies that I'm going to reference for you today, where a lot of this statistical information comes from, are studies that were done from the year 2002 through 2012. So the information is about 6 years old, but much of it is still very relevant. And I'm guessing that we're going to probably have another study in the next 4 years by someone. The two studies I'll talk about are ones that the FBI had conducted, and the other is the New York Police Department. Both had received funding from the federal government to look at this phenomena and kind of look at it from a statistical perspective. So we're going to look at some numbers associated with this, and then we're going to watch a video called Run, Hide, Fight. And it's a video that we show schools and that we show businesses, because no one really, quite honestly, is immune to this phenomenon. Whether you work in the private sector or live obviously in the private sector, or you're amongst a school district, no one has really been immune to the active shooter phenomena. We never know when this is going to happen. So what it is by definition in the study is they look at a mass shooting situation where at least 4 or more people were killed. So that's what quantifies the types of cases that the FBI and New York Police Department looked at. So when we look at that and we start to do an analysis of this, here's the references of the study itself, the dates that it actually occurred. This is the stuff that's a bit alarming to me. Now this is kind of hard for you to see, but if you look, these are other countries, and at the top is the US. And at the time this study was done, there were 271 incidences in the United States that quantified the definition used for the study. So 271 incidences where at least 4 or more people were killed in an active shooter situation. But when we look at Canada, we look at Germany, we look at Australia, Israel, you look at those numbers, they're in the single digits, they're very low. So for whatever the reason, the United States has really, for lack of a better term, the corner on the market of this phenomenon. And I've listened to various speakers who have done research on this in the United States, and the one that I actually identify with the most and believe he's probably got some right ideas on this is a man named Dave Grossman. He's a former lieutenant colonel in the military. He wrote a book called On Killing, and he actually was commissioned in the military during the Vietnam era to teach soldiers to kill. So believe it or not, we are not, as human beings, conditioned to kill our fellow man. We are not. It is not an innate thing that we do. And so the military realizes that from the Civil War on, that soldiers have a difficult time shooting another human being. So Grossman's job was to teach them how to kill, to teach them to get past the psychological deterrent to kill. And how he did that was by using a simple stimulus and then the response. So he conditioned soldiers based on stimulus. So it was no longer a human, it was a uniform of a different color. You saw the uniform, you brought your weapon up and you fired. And he was extremely successful. We had the highest firing rates of any war to date in Vietnam. And we had the highest killing rate of any war to date in Vietnam. Now that's not all good. What Dave found out as a result of his commissioned work and later studies he did was that human beings then have a condition called post-traumatic stress as a result of taking those lives. So a whole nother dimension of fallout happened as a result of him teaching people to kill. But then what happened with him was he began to see this phenomena take place in the United States, and as a psychologist, he was out of the military, he was still studying this whole ideal of killing, and he began to break down all of the shooters that were involved in these active shooter things. He was going to Springfield, Ohio, he was going to Paducah, Kentucky, he was going to Columbine High School, he was going to private sector shootings, and we were in law enforcement allowing him to interview shooters that still remained alive, and if they weren't alive at the end of it, he was dissecting the situation and coming up with his theories. And one of the theories that he has come up with, and I believe that it has some merit, is that why we have such a high casualty rate in the United States is a result of our media today. If you look at how we portray movies in particular, and he highlights several movies, and I think I have some of those listed in this presentation, but we have a theme that has developed in American movies where you have a vigilante, someone who's been wronged by the system. Rambo comes to mind. The Punisher is another movie. The Equalizer is another movie. They're high action drama movies, and if you watch those movies, the heroine, who is a dark heroine because he kills a lot of people in the movie, always has a reason. He's been wronged somehow in the system. And what happens as a result of that is a body count that goes throughout the movie. He really believes strongly that we have adapted this cultural phenomenon, this movie mentality, to modern life. And so today, kids who are bullied in school simply don't cower in the corner and feel sorry for themselves anymore. They adopt this movie model and they get even. They act out their aggression and they take it out on their fellow classmates. And when he did these studies, that theme really comes through strong in a lot of these shootings. So what's different is, yes, these countries see our movies. And now in the last 4 years since this study, or 6 years since this study has been done, we've seen them now adopt this mentality, this American mentality in other countries, as our news reports these mass casualty shootings, and as they watch our American cinema movies, other countries now are adopting this get even phenomenon. So we're unique in some ways, but we're actually now helping other people kind of figure out how to do this same thing. So when we break it down by years from 2000 to 2012, the scary part about this is I don't know what happened in 2003, but there were 15. But if you look after that, they continued to climb. So our worst years were 2009 and 2010, but 2012, the year of the study, was no picnic either. So in America, we had kind of an increasing rate of these incidents that were occurring.
And 2014 was actually 31.
Yeah.
So it continues to go up.
And so if we talk, I can mention names to you. Back in my day, I could mention schools and you would immediately identify with it. In today's modern world, if I mention the term Sandy Hook or the word Sandy Hook, people immediately know what I mean when I say that word, because that was one of the worst school casualty shootings we've had in history as well. So the unfortunate thing is this doesn't seem to be slowing down. So when you look at incidences by type, schools are amongst the highest. 68 of those during the time of this study are 24%. You look down at the other category, and those are simply locations that they really couldn't put in a box. So they could have been a McDonald's, they could have been a retail store, they could have been a mall, something like that. They talk about open commercial at 24, and that could be the mall thing as well. Factories and office buildings are less, but they're still there. So schools are kind of a concerning target. One of the things that Grossman talked about when he did a presentation on law enforcement is he also delves himself into the topic of terrorism. And he said in some ways, someone who is trying to get even at the system or even with a school or even with anybody is a quasi-terrorist. And if you're going to want to inflict the most harm on a community, where would you go to do that? You would go where your most vulnerable population is found 9 months out of the year, and that is the school. And so, you know, when we think of that, that is a very scary proposition. That is a very scary thing. So we look at the shooters in their age. Obviously, when you get into that school range, that 15 to 19, that is the typical age is a student. You have very few shootings in schools that are actually non-students, but they do happen. When you look over here at the other categories where you have office buildings, you have commercial open, you have some school, but you have others, that other big category, that age goes and jumps from 40 to 44. So, and it's typically always male. There have been a handful of female active shooters, but it's always male for the most part. So you have a 40 to 44-year-old male committing the next highest category of these shootings that are non-school related. So what does that mean to us? Well, that kind of gives us a bit of a profile of who we're looking at when it comes to being capable of this. So in the analysis of the study, these are some of the bullet-pointed things that came out of it. Is 98% of the active shooter incidences were carried out by a single attacker. So we know in Columbine there were 2, but most of them are carried out by a single actor. Okay, that's important for us in law enforcement because statistics sometimes helps drive our investigation and our response, dependent upon where we're responding to. They do little or no planning. Some act just extremely impulsive. We know that there have been students that have had this issue boiling within them. They've had a bad interaction with their parent. They've killed their parents and immediately left that homicide and drove right to the school and then inflicted the active shooter incident at the school as a result of their rage. Others do extensive planning. We know in Columbine that they planned for months to prepare for that shooting. We know that we averted a shooting in Waseca where a boy had got access to a kind of a storage area, a locker, and was in that locker and building bombs and building guns, cutting off weapons, getting ready to do this shooting at his high school. And it was a neighbor who watched this boy walk back and forth every day to this storage locker, and it seemed very odd to them that this boy would be doing that. So they informed the sheriff's office of that incident. They did some investigation, and when they went to that storage locker with a warrant, they couldn't believe what they found. So he was really detailed in his planning, and he had some ideas, and much of what he had learned was on the internet. How to make grenades, how to make explosive devices. So a few of them are, they do pre-planned defenses, and they have traps that they set for victims during schools. That was, again, at Columbine that happened. Attackers appear to have learned from previous incidences, so because of the internet and because of media releases today, other shooters, potential shooters, watch and learn from what happened in the previous incident, even law enforcement response. So you can look at the rest of it. Shooters, you know, they're members of the community, and that's who they target. So it's not always a foreign individual like we would think in a true terroristic event coming into a community and just creating havoc. These people live amongst us. So there's some really interesting things that came out of these studies. If you look at the relationship of the shooters to the victims and you look at it from a percentage perspective, the one part that really bothers me is that large green section. These shooters have absolutely no relationship to their victims. So they enter a mall, they enter a business, they enter a common open air area, and they just begin to inflict death and destruction onto people, and they have no idea who they're harming. When you look at the professional one, that's typically an office-related thing where there's been somebody has been disgruntled as a result of being fired or something. Academic, obviously the students are knowing the students that they're killing and shooting at, as well as teachers. There's a family connection in some cases, and then there's the generic other where they're not exactly sure whether there was a relationship or not. So that to me is alarming because you can be anywhere at any time and one of these incidences could occur and you have no idea who the person is and why they're doing it. So understanding, you know, some of the other information that came out of this, these situations are very dynamic and they vary greatly from one attack to the other. Most of them are over within 10 to 15 minutes. 46 are ended by police. Now we had to change about 10 years ago, we changed our philosophy on active shooter events. We used to go to the school or go to the business and the first responding officers would set up a perimeter, we'd wait, the SWAT team would arrive and we'd send the SWAT team in. Well, what we learned from that was that they will keep killing until they're confronted. And typically when they're confronted, you can see about 40% end their rage in suicide, just like in Columbine. 14% surrender and 46 are killed. 46% are actually killed by the police. So we know that the faster we respond, the quicker we actually enter the building, the faster the carnage is going to end. So we've now trained police officers, those first responders, that they don't have the option of sitting in their car and setting up the perimeter and waiting for the SWAT team. They immediately enter the building. So they grab their rifle, they grab their essential gear. If you're a school resource officer and you're in the school, we equip them with a locker that has firearms and other things that they need for a response. They immediately aggress onto the shooter. They don't sit and wait. They immediately engage the shooter. Because again, the faster we can end it or the faster they end it themselves, the fewer people die. So that's one of the things that we've learned. Less than 1% flee or attempt to flee. The anomaly that we had recently where that young man shot people in the school and then tried to escape by just basically blending into the crowd and leaving, and he was identified on video and later caught, that's really an anomaly. That doesn't happen very often. And so, you know, here again, there's no pattern to the selection of victims, and the common motives include anger, revenge, ideology, and untreated mental illness. But again, I think Grossman is right about whether we blend all of those together or not, they're following a pattern that our American media has established in vigilante type movies. So we're going to show you a quick video here, or I'm going to show you a quick video. It's called Run, Hide, Fight.
It may feel like just another day at the office, but occasionally life feels more like an action movie than reality. The authorities are working hard to protect you and to protect our public spaces. But sometimes bad people do bad things. Their motivations are different. The warning signs may vary, but the devastating effects are the same. And unfortunately, you need to be prepared for the worst. If you are ever to find yourself in the middle of an active shooter event, your survival may depend on whether or not you have a plan. The plan doesn't have to be complicated. There are 3 things you could do that make a difference. Run, hide, fight. First, if you can get out, do. Always try and escape or evacuate, even when others insist on staying. Encourage others to leave with you, but don't let them slow you down with indecision. Remember what's important, you, not your stuff. Leave belongings behind and try to find a way to get out safely. Trying to get yourself out of harm's way needs to be your #1 priority. Once you are out of the line of fire, try to prevent others from walking into the danger zone and call 911. can't get out safely, you need to find a place to hide. Act quickly and quietly. Try to secure your hiding place the best you can. Turn out lights, and if possible, remember to lock doors. Silence your ringer and vibration mode on your cell phone. And if you can't find a safe room or closet, try to conceal yourself behind large objects that may protect you. Do your best to remain quiet and calm. As a last resort, if your life is at risk, whether you are alone or working together as a group, fight. Act with aggression. Improvise weapons. Disarm him. And commit to taking the shooter down, no matter what. Try to be aware of your environment. Always have an exit plan. Know that in an incident like this, victims are generally chosen randomly. The event is unpredictable and may evolve quickly. The first responders on the scene are not there to evacuate or tend to the injured. They are well trained and are there to stop the shooter. Your actions can make a difference for your safety and survival. Be aware and be prepared. And if you find yourself facing an active shooter, there are 3 key things you need to remember to survive. Run, hide, fight.
It's a pretty short, but yet to the to the very core or point of what we are asking people to do in these situations. When these things first began, we had an entirely different strategy. We wanted people to barricade. We wanted them to hunker down where they were. We were fearful because of what happened in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Those kids decided to pull fire alarms in the school, get everybody to come outside, and then shoot at them when they exited the building. So our strategies were then, well, we'll get everybody, we'll leave them inside, we'll barricade them, and we'll wait for the police to arrive. We've adopted a much more fluid response to this now. We have to have you have the idea you need to think, number one, for yourself. You need to leave and flee the area if you can, get away from the active shooter, and if you can't, then you need to hide and barricade yourself. And lastly, and most importantly, you need to fight if that person should then try to enter the area that you're in. And when I talk about this with business people, and we even talk about this with schools, we're not talking about just a passive aggression. We're talking about an active aggression, because you have to realize that your life is at stake. Their targets are random, they don't care who you are. And so if you have to use lethal force to stop this person from shooting you, even though that's innately not in our being to do, you may have to do that so that you can save yourself and other people in this incident. So we want you to fight aggressively back towards the individual that's causing the problem. So it's very simple, it's very easy to remember: run, hide, fight. It works in almost any situation or any environment where this could potentially happen. And I personally, I like things that are easy to remember. And when you can, and if you can get on to 911, we number one want to leave your phone open, so don't hang up on us. We won't necessarily, if you have to quit talking because you're barricaded and the person's walking by, we understand that. If you hang up your phone, one of the things the 911 dispatcher will do is we have the technology to call your phone back. So if you're hiding and you hang up on us, we don't want your phone to ring again. Plus, we want to be able to hear what's going on around you. And if you can talk to us, talk to us. We need to know the location of the active shooter, the number of shooters if there's more than one, their physical descriptions, type of weapons they're using if you're familiar with weapons, the potential number of victims that may be already injured or hurt. We want you to silence your phone, turn off your lights, and leave your line open. That's very important. And then when we arrive, you have to understand that our first and foremost job when we get there is to find the person responsible for this incident and end the situation. So we are going to walk by wounded people. We're going to go by classrooms that are barricaded. We may even go by people that are still hiding in the hallway because we're going to go find that person that's causing the problem. That's our first priority. So that's difficult for people to kind of understand that if we're walking by you and you're injured, we may not necessarily stop to render you aid. That first team in is going to aggress onto the shooter. The second teams and the third teams in may be able to deal with people that are injured or hurt. And then eventually, once we have terminated the threat either upon arrest or other means, then we're going to go systematically through the building, and we have a system in which we'll be letting classrooms or business people, whoever is barricaded, know it is the police that are outside their door. Because we do not want you to open the door for anyone, because one of the things that would be easy for an active shooter to do is tell you they are the police. So we have a system that we will work with the school or with the business to let people inside know what we're going to do when we arrive at the door to make sure that they're safe. So that sometimes is hard for people to understand. So this is what we do when we arrive. We kind of talked about this. And then when we encounter people, I just had this presentation with the county campus for all of our buildings and all of our people. When law enforcement encounters you, if you're fleeing the building or leaving, or they encounter you locked in a room, we don't know necessarily who you are, and we won't necessarily know if the active shooter is amongst you. So we treat everybody kind of like a suspect in the beginning. We want to see everyone's hands. We want them to comply with our commands. Ultimately, you may be searched, because if we haven't found the person yet, we need to begin to narrow the possibilities of who they are. So even though this is a traumatic event and you're probably going to be a bit in shock, we still have protocols that we have to adhere to until we make sure everyone is completely safe. And then there's things that you can do either as a business or as a citizen or as a school. You can develop a plan for action. And everyone pretty much is getting ahead of this now because this has become so prevalent, and especially schools. You have kind of a system for reporting the emergency amongst teachers or coworkers. You have a system for evacuation. You should have, we call it basically a go kit. You should have a briefcase with all the information about your school or business contained within that case that is available to administrative personnel so they can grab that when they head out the door. Because things that we're going to want to know is how many students or how many people are in your factory. What are the locations in which phones are located? Do you have camera systems in place, and how can we access those? We need to know building plans so we can see your layout. We need to understand where your power, your phone, and everything, all your utilities are located, because we're going to have access to those. So you can kind of help prepare yourself and prepare us for all of that stuff. We may need keys, and that could be an access card key. We might need physical keys for your building, especially if this becomes an event that is longer than the 10 to 15 minutes that it typically is. If the person decides to barricade themselves in the school or in the business and we end up in a negotiation situation, all of this stuff becomes crucial. If you're a school, we need a student roster and list, because obviously if in your plan you have a way and a place in which you're going to evacuate students and people, we tell businesses you have to set up relationships with sister businesses adjacent to you, because we want your people to leave there and go to that business so that we can begin an accounting of who's there and who's not. And we want you to tell your employees, just simply do not leave the campus. Don't leave the business and go home because it was a bad day. You need to be accounted for. So we need a place where we can debrief people, interview them while the event's going on, and in the aftermath, the unfortunate reality for us is we have an investigation to conduct. So all of the people that were a party to this event are now witnesses as well, and we need the information from them. Whether or not the active shooter survives the ordeal or not, we still have an investigation to do in the aftermath. So we have to have people where they can be, where we can, account for them. So these are things, obviously, floor plans, keys, facility personnel, daily schedules. We need to know your emergency situation, your evacuation routes. The one big piece, as I mentioned earlier, is all your phone calling areas, where all your numbers dial to, if you have that available to us so we can call. And then this kit, this go bag thing, these are some things that you should perhaps have in that as well. You should have a radio, if you have radios within the confines of your school or business, floor plans, obviously, employee rosters, contact numbers, first aid kits, and flashlights. And then there are some preventative things you can do as well. There are some behavioral things that we watch for in people, whether they be students or employees. When we begin to see drastic changes in behavior, when we begin to hear overt threats, whether they be spoken verbally or they be on Facebook or they're posted anywhere that we can document them, we don't treat those anymore with kid gloves. We take them very seriously because we've learned from prior experience that these are all precursors to an event happening. There are many of the active shooters in history have given ample notice that they were going to do what they did, and in some cases either nobody paid attention or they said, well, that's just Jimmy and he always is like that and Jimmy would never do that. Well, Jimmy does that 10 weeks later and everyone says, well, that was a no-brainer, the handwriting was on the wall. So we never take anything that we hear lightly. We always ask everyone to report anything they see. The lady in Waseca is to this day a hero because she averted a huge disaster at the Waseca High School by simply making a phone call. She saw something that didn't look right to her. She could have easily ignored that and thought, well, what is that boy doing going to that storage locker? That just doesn't seem right. But she made the phone call. And we ask that you put the burden on us. Let us be the ones to make the determination as to whether that person is going to be a threat to someone later or whether they're simply going there because they're working on, their ATV. We'd much rather find out the latter and that it's no big deal, but when we open that storage locker and he's manufacturing bombs and cutting off firearms and been storing up ammunition, we know that we have a kid that was about to commit a heinous act. So never let anything go. Be vigilant, report what you see, make sure law enforcement is aware. Don't feel embarrassed or like you're going to put somebody out. We hear that a lot. Well, you guys have so much to do that you don't need to know about that. Yes, we do. That is very much what we're trying to do, is prevent these things. So these are some indicators of potential issues. In the work environment, we sometimes don't think of employees who are having either personal struggles or professional struggles, and we're dealing with them every day. And if we begin to see some stranger behavior, and with social media today, it has always amazed me that shooters are willing to post information about their intent. And that's a good thing for us, it really is. And it is probably a good thing for them. They're acting out that way first, and we identify them and we can deal with the situation before it goes to the next step, which is actually acquiring the firearms to do what they intend to do. There are some of these people that have never been on the radar, and I'm going to be honest with you about that. We never knew about them criminally. We never had any calls for service related to their behavior. They show up one day and they commit this heinous act. The Las Vegas shooting is a very good example of that. That gentleman had never been on law enforcement's radar. We never knew about any issues with him. He had never made any overt threats prior to that. And according to his girlfriend, she claims that she had no idea he was planning to do what he did. But he acquired a massive amount of weaponry. He had bought bump stocks to make those guns fully automatic. He had positioned himself at a hotel where he had a incredible vantage point, and he actually had planned it out to the extent that he believed the caliber of firearms that he had obtained were going to be able to pierce the tanks that were holding aviation fuel at the adjacent airport to cause catastrophic death and damage. But unfortunately for him, he had miscalculated and those tanks were never punctured. Otherwise, the carnage could have been tenfold or worse. So we know there are people like that out there too, that show absolutely no indicators, no sign of what they're going to do, and they just do it. So for us, I don't know, to this day I stand before you after 35 years of experience, I don't really know what the solution to this is. Now, when Dave Grossman confronted the American media moguls about movies they make and about the games, one of the things, that correlation that he made is many of the active shooters that he studied in the aftermath of these shootings, they were very involved in first-person shooter games. Where that really troubled Grossman was one of the things that he did for the military was he developed their system. It's called a FAT system. That was a system used to train soldiers to kill. So it was a video game, a very advanced video game where they deployed their weapons on soldiers on the screen, and it was a stimulus response. Those soldiers just showed up, and it was desensitizing them to the violence of killing. It was creating a psychological environment where it was a stimulus and their response was to fire, and it was very, very successful. And he says those kids play those video games every day. In Paducah, Kentucky, there was a young man who went into a prayer vigil at the opening of school, and there were 15 kids at that prayer vigil. He shot 11 of them, and 9 of them he shot in the head. Now, what was amazing about that was he had never handled an actual firearm in his life. He had stole a .22 pistol from his grandfather, went there that day, and did that. But what Grossman found out in the aftermath was he stood in front of a TV screen every day with a fake weapon and played an interactive shooter game where he got extra points for headshots. So he had conditioned himself through that training simulator to do what he did days later and carried it out in real life under stress with everyone screaming and running, and was able to do what he did. That is amazing. And so he has great trepidation over the fact that he created a system that was made for soldiers but now has been copied into the private market and sold to kids, millions of copies. The one thing that troubles him, and he says this in his presentation, is millions, if not billions, of people have those games, but it's less than 1% of them that act that fantasy out in real life. So he said it's really hard to go to a gaming company and say your product teaches kids to kill. They laugh at you, and their profit margins are so huge for selling those games, there's no incentive for them to say, well, you know, we can't stop doing what we're doing and go out of business. So, but that is a very real connection between many of these shooters, is the first-person shooter game. So these are just some signs and indicators of what you can look for, either with students or coworkers or people in general. There's shifts in their behavior. There's actually overt action on their part, whether it's on social media or they talk about it. We're simply asking people to report it. So that's it on my part. I talked way too long, didn't I?
No, you're good. You're good. I am going to we can flip the lights on. I'm not going to do the video. I'm going to talk from the school's perspective on what we're doing. I've been at Cannon Falls Schools for 18 years now, and we've always told our kids to hide. And that has worked. You know, when the fire alarm is pulled, all those kinds of things, we've followed everything for years. If you go to the elementary school, there's a little place around where the sinks are at, and the kids go under them. They know to get under the sink and get in that corner. We pull the shades. We've worked with the fire department. We've worked with the local PD. That's what we have done for over 18 years. We've told our kids to hide. We know that that's not the best way to do things, and a lot of the things you hit on today, we know that that's not the best way to do things anymore. And so our staff, we had 24 staff members that went and got trained on ALICE, and that stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. And for the alerting, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get the message out there right away. We are no longer going to say lockdown, you know, hard lockdown, soft lockdown, none of that. We are going to go in and we are going to tell people exactly where the intruder is. District office, we have a gunman. They are going to know the location. They are going to know exactly what's happening. Research and everything that you alluded to as well. really helps if everyone knows exactly what's going on. We used to worry that that may scare people and things like that, but when our buildings are as big as they are and we know that we can lock down one section and get kids away from that specific place, we know that that's going to work. We are going to go into a lockdown. We're obviously going to call 911. We are fortunate enough that our local PD is on board with this and went to the training as well. They are then going to train their staff just as we're doing the whole first week of school. Okay, so this is going to be a kind of a different way of doing things. Again, we're going to inform for the eye. We're going to communicate real-time actions. We're going to communicate everything that's happening so that staff and everyone knows exactly what's going on. The big change here is we're going to do the C, which is counter. We are going to teach kids, whether they are 5 years old in kindergarten or they are 18-year-olds and they're seniors, different ways that they can counter. This is sometimes fearful for parents. They don't want their kids fighting a gunman, nor do we. But if they feel like they can pick up this computer and they can throw it that is causing danger, and they feel okay doing that, we're going to allow them to do that. For 18 years, we've told them, hide, hide. And every single school shooting, they've gotten through locks, they've gotten through security systems, they've gotten through everything. They go into a classroom, and what do they find? 20 kids hiding in the corner, and that's how these casualties, we believe, are higher. A lot of research that shows even throwing this microphone, throwing your cell phone, throw anything you have, make lots of noise. Instead of being super quiet, we are making a ton of noise. If Rod's coming in here right now and he's a gunman, and these kids start making noise and you're moving, okay, we know that that's harder for him to do anything to us. We know that Rod's not going to do that. But if he was to do that, so we're going to allow kids to think on their feet. Now there might be little Johnny that says, no way, I'm still hiding under my desk. That's okay. If that's where his comfort level is, that is absolutely fine. Little Janie might say, I need to run. And that's the next step is evacuate. We're going to have spots that all kids can go to. We've trained our students so much to go back to their homeroom teacher. Miss McNurlin, she teaches in a class, they run back to their homeroom teacher. They shouldn't do that. They should all know where the safe points are, and they're going to go to those locations. So we have high school students that go down and help with elementary kids. They don't have to come back to the high school to check back in. We want them to go to a safe point that might be down there. Okay? The biggest thing here is training our parents. The kids will catch on to this really well. The teachers are on board. We have committed a lot of our state aid on security for this. We feel that the perimeter of our district is really, really well done. But believe it or not, and Chief can add to this if he'd like, perimeters don't always stop anybody. If you look at Sandy Hook, they had top-of-the-line security system. They even had shatterproof, gun-proof, bulletproof glass. They'll get in. So we need to be able to react once they are into our system. So we're really excited to adopt this ALICE system. We think it's really going to work. But again, training those parents is going to be the big part. The worst thing you can do is have 1,200 parents come to the school because word gets out that there's a shooting at the school. It actually makes things a lot worse. We're going to have a focal point at St. Ansgar's, the park. We're going to get that information out to parents after we've got our staff trained, take all of those steps. And we're really, really excited. It feeds off very well off of what Sheriff McNurlin was talking about. This is just going to be, it's called ALICE. It's a different type of system, but very similar. So we're really, really, really excited for what's coming. It's a little bit of a change. And the seniors that have learned this their whole way through are probably going to be like, what? We don't hide anymore? Another big change, you haven't heard of a fire in a school since 1962 or 1958. It's one of the two. I can't remember the date. It's within that time frame. We are no longer going to have kids leaving the minute you hear the fire drill pulled, okay? Because of some of the situations where we've talked about that. Schools don't burn down. They're made of brick. You step out, the teacher might smell. Is there smoke? Is there danger? And someone's going to get on the intercom and say, we do have a fire in the biology lab. Please have your students leave the classroom. Oh, okay, we can go now. They're not going to leave immediately by hearing those fire drills either. So we think we've fixed both problems. The people that pull the drills to have everyone leave the school and you're shooting mass amounts of people. But we also think we're fixing the problem that when they're in the district as well. So these are going to be in every single classroom. The biggest issue that schools have are substitute teachers. On any given day, I could have 5 to 7 substitute teachers. The Shepherd Center is wonderful about sending up some of our seniors to read to kids. They may not know what's going on. These will be plastered all over the buildings, and so that everyone will know what they should do in any situation. We are also going to train our substitute teachers, the ones that are in the district. We think this is so important that we are going to invest that time and those finances to make sure that everyone understands how to do it. We have completely wiped out the way everyone used to have a key to the school. If you remember back, I think everyone had one. Jeff Schobloom with the Sheriff's Office is getting 38 fobs. Each of his team will have a fob to get in. Chief McCormick's crew has a fob and a kiosk system to get into the buildings. And all of those things are great, but I think the main thing that you said that's important is time is a factor. Those officers can be up here in 7 minutes, 4 minutes, they're fast. Anytime we call with anything, our PD is here right away, our Sheriff's Office is here. But if we have people internally that are trained and can do those things, I think that's going to be better. My initial reaction, because of my 12 years in the military, is to go towards the danger. That may not be everyone's initial reaction, but we have a lot of people on staff that do want to help that way. And so to have them trained to do it properly, I think is going to be really good. So I don't have a lot to do. I was going to do a video too. It doesn't make sense to do both. I just wanted to share with you kind of a big change that the school is doing. If you read my educational update last week, it is all about this. So if you have any questions, you can email me or call me. We are going to get the staff trained and then bring in community members and have big meetings for them as well, because we need to have everyone on the same page on this. So
You'll hear this conversation. I got drug into it actually at a family event, as Beth had mentioned. My wife's a teacher, all of her sisters are teachers. There's brother and sister-in-laws on that side of the family that are teachers, and I was at one Thanksgiving, sitting in the corner trying to eat my pumpkin pie when they broke out into this conversation. And Beth knows my wife's side of the family, and they're very, let's just say, spirited in their conversation. That's for sure. And they were split on this whole conversation about whether educators should be armed or not in their classrooms. And I sat quietly in the corner and I tried to avoid this conversation as best I could until I heard one of her sisters say, "And what do you think, Scott?" And I was brought into the conversation kicking and screaming. So my response to that is always this. Yes, it is true that an armed response does end these situations quickly. However, it is not just any armed response. You have to remember that law enforcement professionals train every day in some way, shape, or form, either through video, policy, real life firearm training, and scenario training to prepare themselves for those events. A teacher with a permit to carry being allowed to carry in the school might not be the right response. Even if they're a dedicated firearm person and they shoot regularly, psychologically, physically, and mentally, they may not know or have the...
And we do very much agree with that, and that's why we feel like arming people with anything to slow that person down. If you hit them or just in the counter is so important in this, grabbing anything that slows them down. If you look at many of the last shootings, the football coach from the Florida incident, he completely grabbed everything he had and was just throwing things at him and distracting them. So we're not talking about arming teachers. We are talking about distracting them and what we call in the ALICE acronym, countering, because that gives us time for their crews to get there and do their job.
But that conversation is going to come up. It does.
It does.
All the time.
I can't tell you how many times I've gotten calls on it. I've got a director of facilities and operations, and he'd be phenomenal. I get the question, why don't you have a school resource officer? I get that question all the time. Most of the shootings, the 31 that we referenced last year, had school resource officers. You can't be everywhere at the same time everywhere. And so we feel that our resources are better used in perimeter control. We have state-of-the-art cameras to help. We've got a security system at the doors. We feel that's good. We can probably get away with that a little bit because we've got a local PD. Jill is at the school almost every day. Chief McCormick is good to have our officers eat lunch with kids to build that relationship with them. I would rather spend the money on, we wrote a grant and got money for a mental health therapist that is going to be at our school 3 days a week next year. We have the Hope Coalition. You were here to hear Linda speak a couple weeks ago, or a couple sessions ago. And we have her employee that works with us on mental health in the high school. So I get those questions all the time. Why don't you let so-and-so, I know he can carry, why don't you allow him to do that? That is not the direction the school is going.
It creates such a huge liability for the school district, because if you do arm someone and allow them to kind of operate in that quasi-faction, the one thing Jeff knows, one thing Tom knows, one thing Jill knows, is they're responsible for every round they fire downrange at a suspect, whether they're justified or not. And in a school environment, you have to remember you have hundreds, if not thousands of kids and teachers and people that are in the backdrop of those situations. So the best trained, and I'm not trying to diminish anybody with a permit to carry, I believe very much in that law, but I just don't think that unless you're a peace officer and you train as regular as we do for those scenarios, you're going to put the school into a huge liability. And we already are covered for that, officially and otherwise with our organizations, for having to take that deadly force action. Plus, we are charged under statute the authority to do that when necessary, and a civilian, quite honestly, is not, unless they're in a defense mode for themselves. Even though they may be doing the right thing by other people in the school, there still could be a legal issue with that. So when I brought all that up to my family, I got scowls on one side and I got grins on the other. But it was the best way that I could answer that question for them. And I don't see right now on the horizon a very good way to arm educators, even though in some ways it would seem to be the right thing to do.
And that is the response when I get the calls. I think people would really like to see bus drivers armed. Believe it or not, that when he talked about the other, buses are very much, again, a part of that other. It's not really the school yet because you're not there. Buses are very much a haven for bullying type activity, those kinds of things. But again, using our resources, we now have cameras, 4 different locations on every single bus. We have bus aides that ride the buses so the driver can do his job or her job, and yet the aide can go back there and say, okay, you two need to stop talking to each other that way. You talk a lot about the bullying. Schools, I promise you, are doing everything they can to stop bullying. I think we're getting a bad rap that we don't do enough. We are doing everything we can, but these kids are coming from environments that none of us saw 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. They are coming traumatized. They are already addicted to drugs and other type things when they're coming into middle school, those types of things. Mental health, you attested to that. So please do your best to inform people that I don't think it's the schools that are creating an environment for bullying. A lot of that is coming to the school, and we are doing what we can. So I feel very confident that if anything, let's hope it never does, but anything was to happen at Cannon Falls Schools, I really do feel like we are prepared the best that we can. Listening to other superintendents that have been through this, Hastings would be our closest school. They had a shooting. They were involved in the training for us. They came down. We actually hired one of the principals that was shot at. His daughter works for us. So she's very involved in our safety program as well. So we've got some great things going on. And like I said, I'm not going to show a video that I think kind of is a very similar program. We've adopted Alice. Our local PD has adopted this. And we're really excited to move forward. So if you come and see the school and you see those types of things, our lockdown type situations and practice drills will look different this year. So, but if you have any questions, you can always email me or call me. I'm happy to talk school safety with anybody. So.
You can me too, but I'll have to be at home.
So. Any questions? I do have to go to Casson, so I'll take my questions, I think, first. I'm going to some training in Casson Manorville. We good? All right.
I'll email you. I've got questions.
Okay. Oh, sure. You sure can. Do you have some? I can.
No, I'll get Jeff.
Okay.
I just want
Sounds good.
to maybe share.
What's that?
Well, I'm just thinking if you ask your question, you may get.
Oh, you guys, I've got time. I'm trying to sneak ahead of Scott. If you have questions for me, I'll take them first, and he can go second.
You just hear, the daughter who something is going to be helping in a safety program. What's that about?
We have a safety team. We always have.
Okay, I don't know about this.
Okay, yep. Every school has what they call a safety committee. We're just very fortunate that she had a connection with the principal in Hastings because it's her dad. And so he came down, the whole team from Hastings Middle School came down and met with us. So
She's an adult.
she's an adult.
She's a teacher.
She's a teacher, fifth grade
She's on
teacher.
staff.
Thank you. She's a fifth grade
I
teacher
think
for
it was
us.
an agent here.
Oh, I,
Okay, so can, besides parents, can other interested grandparents, et cetera, come in and
Sure.
see some of this training or get some background?
right. We're going to get our staff trained first. We're going to get the students trained next. And then we are hoping by December, was that the minutes I
I don't remember the.
I think it was November, December, we thought, around breaks, have a community outlet kind of meeting, have people come in so they know what it looks like. We're not trying to keep it quiet, anyone can come, but it's important we train people first before this is what we're gonna do, and then we don't know the ins and outs on it, so.
What I see is that this is not valuable only to schools, but for us in any place. And if we're in a mall, or if we're in a business or something, and we notice something,
Right,
and we then could go into gear. And I like this, just throwing anything. I was never allowed to do that, and so my
it's a different way
opportunity-
to think, to tell kids they can actually throw something at an adult. The good kids are like, what? I've never thrown anything at someone in my life, so.
I just think it's really interesting, your statement about fire drills, because it's something we've always done, and
Forever.
what it seems is that people have, we always used to say the prayer, we always used to say the pledge, we always used to, and there's an awful lot of we always used to. And so I think it's important for people to realize that these are different days, and the rules have to be looked at, and why are we doing that? And
Well,
does it
and the
make
state
sense
still
for-
requires some fire drills, so we're still going to do fire drills because the state requires them. But sometimes the state is kind of behind what we're trying to do as well, and just because you hear it because we're gonna let everyone know, today's a fire drill. Some would argue that that's not necessarily a good idea either, because once that's out, and again, as McNurlin said, the people that are attacking our businesses, or especially our schools, are people that know what's going on. So they might see the announcements, hey, tomorrow's a fire drill. So we're gonna be re-looking at everything, but we obviously think it's important to practice a fire drill. If an unexpected one comes up, why would you immediately leave a building if, there's no reason to, or if you don't smell smoke or anything like that, so.
Often a visiting child in the building as well that
Right.
just doesn't know what they're pulling.
Right. Well, I'm really appreciative of you saying that, because I do think things have changed. We didn't have these situations back in the 50s, and we're still going by 50s standards on what we need to do. So I appreciate you saying that, so. And we do say the pledge every single day at the elementary, and we say it every Monday at the high school, middle school, because we're very proud. I am very, very proud that we do that here. We are Americans, and we'll continue to say the pledge as long as I'm superintendent here. So, yep.
I'm, I'm a foster grandparent at the
Sure,
school.
sure.
And like 2 years ago, we brought them in.
Right,
I see, parents of preschoolers that have them.
Yep.
I've always been concerned about the lack of that, some people have access to.
Well, they have, the fob only works for an hour and a half for that drop-off time.
Right.
They're programmed. Every single, I don't have it on there, but it's in my other keys. Yeah, it's programmed. Even if they aren't scheduled for a Friday and they try to come in on a Friday, they can't. What that allows is the doors are always locked, and I know people might say, well, for that hour and a half, that parent can get in. You're right, they can, but they can also shoot in any window they wanted and get in,
Right.
So what we're trying to do is minimize that. We call it a soft lockdown. The perimeter is always locked. Yes, people can come and go, but they don't have access at midnight or those types of
Well, I can't
things.
use mine at
Yeah, no, you can't. Don't come up, Kay, you cannot use that. So it's programmed timing that you work. If you're an employee there, it works all the time. So I guess, it could be an employee that decides to, those are just the things we have to deal with, so.
But again, the nice thing about a fob system compared to a key is that they have an employee who's been exhibiting some problems, and maybe is being traced
I
on
can
leave.
do it from my
They
phone.
can be deactivated.
And everything is locked.
The key has to be
Every
collected.
administrator has this on their phone, and it's pretty amazing. I pull up this, and the camera senses any danger or anyone pushes a 911 call. Every administrator can pull up every door in our system, and I can do it from my phone. So we can go into a lockdown. I can be in Passon today, and the situation happens, it's triggered to a 911 call. Even if it's accidental, I immediately go to this system and can do it from anywhere. And so it's a pretty amazing system, and how we can confine someone to a specific area. Some of the spaces that we have trouble with is the high school atrium. Beautiful as it is, and the cafeteria, as wonderful as it is, it's very open, and it's very hard to lock those spaces down. The other issue that we have a million, that's exaggeration, lots of people that like to walk at around the track, and I think that's wonderful. That is one glitch that we're still working on. They check into the high school office, but again, you're allowing community, which we want to do, into our building. I believe that they're taxpayers, in our community, they should be able to walk. We need to think that process through and what that's gonna look like. Do we need to do more of a check on those people and those types of things? But we're not there yet. We're gonna start with the new ALICE system first. Yep.
Do you have something more specific kind of training to use for special needs kids?
We do, and those teachers will be trained a little bit differently. Jeff and I, when we were at that training, they talked about that kids that have auditory and the sirens or anything are going off, you're gonna have to do different things for them. They also talk very much how you train a kindergartner, and a senior is very different. Your special needs population, how you're going to react with those teachers will be trained a little bit differently. The program does play into that a little bit. It also does a nice job of playing, what do you do when they're all back on the back playground area? What do you do in those situations? Very different from what you would do if you were in the building. So yes, we will be doing things different. Special thanks out to St. Ansgar's. If you know anyone on that board, tell them thank you. They are a very good resource for us, for a safe place to go. Kids know they can just run across that and get to a safe place. They also allow our parents to pick up there, so that's quite nice too. Yep, good thinking. We're in the same boat. And even kids that are maybe in wheelchairs, what do you do in those type of situations? And
Thank you.
all right.
You're welcome.
Thanks for doing the video.
I was just going to add another angle to this. With Scott and Beth, they're working from the top down, and that's great to implement these programs. For us on the road, like Scott said, we don't train to lock a situation down, wait for help, and stuff like that. We've done active shooter trainings, we've done them in the schools, we've done them in a couple of businesses, the old hospital in Red Wing. So we train in this. And when we get there, of course, we have the new 800 radio system is phenomenal. We don't have radio outages anymore, very limited. So we're able to keep updating and giving real-time updates. Here's where I am, here's what I see. And as responding officers show up, even if Rochester State Patrol, the State Patrol guys show up, or Rochester PD were to show up to Pine Island schools, they tap them into our radio system, what do they call that?
Well, we can use regional as well as state.
Pardon?
So you can use regional as well as state
Yep.
talk groups and cross patches and stuff, so.
And they patch them in, so now we're all on the same air and we're all talking. And we go in and it's very active, it's very aggressive, and we are going to the target like Scott said. At one or two of the active shooter trainings, we actually had students there, it was summertime. We had students in there acting as injured kids. And when you're trying to clear a building, and you got kids grabbing your legs saying, help me, the hardest thing to do is to not help them. I'm sorry, I can't. You gotta kind of shake them off and keep going. But it was all part of conditioning us because we have a primary mission. And I'll never forget, it was my first active shooter training as a police officer, was down in Pine Island. Once we established the threat was dead, and the school resource officer was also, once that was done, it went out on the radios, and we all turned and started, and we're kind of play acting here, but we started dealing with the kids that were casualties. And then for some of us, like I was assigned Pine Island at that time, so I knew a handful of the kids. You know, I was working at Contract County. And now you're having fun with the kids and we're going through the rescue scenarios. So we're able to get that broad training. And we train every year with officer tactics. So this is something, you know, I get upset with the media when they say, well, officers need more training. We're training in this stuff, but we can't train for everything because it's fluid and dynamic. There are so many variables that we have to take in, and we do the best we can. Okay? Unfortunately, people make mistakes, but we do the best we can. And we have administrators like these two gentlemen who are proactive, and this is what they're doing for us. And they're giving us that training. So it's just kind of my side of it, you know, my opinions. Hope they're okay.
Wow.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, and that's when you guys.
There's a vehicle
Yeah.
that had stalled out on.
Monday to Tuesday morning, I think.
Yeah, stalled out on Highway 52, and I'm not sure exactly how it all happened, but the occupants of that car, they came into town and started car prowling on the west side. And
The story I'm going with is the sheriff's department brought him here.
Okay.
Just teasing, Scott. Yeah, they came into town. The officer that was working that night actually was Lieutenant Berg, and you know, he was aware that they were stranded and they didn't want assistance, which seemed sort of odd. And so he just decided he was just going to stand back and watch them. So he kind of got back a block away and just kind of watched what they did. And sure enough, they walk along and start trying cars and go into a couple of cars. And so he went up, he called for the deputy who was in the area. I think he was the one that had found the car. And they got one of them and tried to find the other one, but they weren't able to find him. Pretty sure that, you know, from his investigation, he knows who it is, but there's a little bit more we still have to do before we get charges on it. But it's a great reminder. I know last night for National Night Out, you know, the officers that were visiting the parties, we're talking about that, which is, you know, lock your cars, take your valuables out of them. Most of our car break-ins aren't actually break-ins. They just lift the handle and the door opens. They're just categorized as car break-ins within our coding system. But predominantly, it's people leave them unlocked. We recommend that, you know, you don't leave your car unlocked. We also recommend you don't leave your house unlocked. And I realize that, you know, may be a change because, you know, 30 years ago, you never had to worry about this. Well, sadly, we're not where we were 30 years ago. Scott was much younger looking. And, you know, so what we recommend is lock your house. You know, if you're running down to the grocery store, lock it. Because it only takes that one, you know, opportunity of walking up, ringing the doorbell, nobody answers, try the door, go in, and, you know, they could be going after prescription medication. They could be going after, you know, small things that they could trade for narcotics. Almost all of our car prowls are usually associated with kids, but the home break-ins that we've had, burglaries, are associated typically with people that are controlled substance addiction. I don't know if it's the same way for out of the townships for the sheriff's department. But you know, what they're stealing things that they can either trade for drugs or they can pawn. And by locking your house, you may not stop them because they may go to your neighbor's house, but you keep yourself from being a victim that's easily victimized. We have had residences, you know, that were burglarized by forced entry. They're very rare, but they do occur. But again, taking those steps creates the barrier for just an easy victimization. So hopefully that answered your question on that, but then I had to give another pitch for, you know, just the general lockup.
So, Rod said the canine was involved.
Yep, I believe they did a tracking on the one suspect, trying to locate him. What it sounds like is somebody came and picked him up. Of course, you know, nowadays, everybody has a cell phone. I think Beth, you alluded to, I think Scott, you alluded to social media in your presentation. Honestly, it's not unusual for us, as we were conducting our investigations on these things, burglaries, car prowls, to find that they took pictures of themselves committing the crimes. Sometimes they post it up on social media, sometimes it's on their phone when we, are doing our investigation. But it's a lot different than it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, if you ran from the police, you ended up having to go somewhere there was a payphone. So, the police department would just go to start checking the areas with payphones and, likely find you. Nowadays, you just hide somewhere, you call a friend, and you jump in the car and off you go. It's made our job a little harder in that aspect, but we've also got some really good tools that help us on our side of the business.
Thanks, Steve. Those are great questions.